Good morning and welcome to the University of New England's Center for Global Humanities. I am Nicole Trufant, UNE's Vice President of Finance and Administration. Our center director, Dr. Anwar Majid, is flying back from Morocco today and cannot join us. He wishes you a wonderful event. We are proud to support the Portland community by sponsoring today's event. UNE and the City of Portland, as well as our region, share the same concerns and have the same aspirations for growth and prosperity. I hope the activities in today's program will help us move in that direction. I would now like to introduce Quincy Hensel, Chief Executive Officer for the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Good morning. Nice. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I am Quincy Hensel. I'm the CEO at the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce, and on behalf of the Chamber, as well as all of our host organizations, today we want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day on this beautiful Saturday to be a part of this very critical dialogue around the future of our city. I'm going to start, I just have very brief introductory remarks, and I want to start with a quote that we all felt really formed the foundation of why we are all gathered here this morning. The quote is from Jane Jacobs' The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and it's very short. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. So we're all here this morning because we share something in common. We probably share many things in common, but most notably for purposes of today's presentation, we all love Portland and the region around us, and we want to make it better. This morning, we are going to hear how civic engagement and commitment to common good can shape the future of a community. 3 years ago, 4 organizations, Creative Portland, Portland Society for Architecture, Muskie School of Public Service, and the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce, we all agreed to come together and work together on issues of growth and change. Last year, the Center for Global Humanities joined us in this effort, and we are all committed to collaborating together to really make positive change happen in our region and to unlock our potential to build a better future. Since we all gathered last fall for Challenge of Change 2.0, all of our respective organizations have been spearheading their own initiatives, and I just wanted to give you a very, very quick synopsis of what we've all been up to since we last gathered. Creative Portland has just completed phase 1 of a Portland cultural plan, which provides a snapshot of needs and concerns of the arts, cultural, and creative economy organizations, businesses, as well as individuals in Portland and the region. The goal of the plan is a focused direction for nurturing and supporting the arts and cultural life of Greater Portland. Portland Society for Architecture is engaged in a project called The Complete City, and this project is a mapping exercise which allows citizens, by way of a blank map of Portland, to share what they love, what they don't love, and what they would like to see different about our city. And I know that to date, over 250 completed maps have been part of this ongoing effort. There are samples today out in the lobby, and I know that you can see all of the maps that have been submitted on an archive on their website, which is thecompletecity.com. These maps truly provide a unique vision for Portland, and they are just getting started. This effort is going to continue over the course of next year, so we encourage all of you to participate in this project. Meanwhile, USM's Muskie School of Public Service has provided very needed policy research and analysis. They first published last winter a report titled Growing Portland, The Case for Growth, Not Whether But How. And just last month, a second report was released, which builds on the first, and that report is titled Greater Portland Tomorrow, Choices for Sustained Prosperity. And the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce, we have been initiating a major effort to build community will around the necessity to have shared and sustainable growth to achieve well-being for everybody. This is truly an effort to create a region where growth and change will be intentional and will be strategic and will create vibrant communities and economic opportunities for all of those who call Greater Portland their home. So while all of our respective organizations are working in our own unique initiatives for our own members, our own audiences, or for the community as a whole, we're making a very concerted effort to connect these initiatives together and move in a singular direction and towards a common goal. This year, we've invited more organizations to join our efforts. You've seen several of them have set up tables in the lobby, so we encourage you during the break and after today's presentation to please go check out the different tables and organizations. We hope that all of you will consider getting involved in this effort. So say yes to an organization that embraces your vision and embraces your values and help us advance our community. So with that, I'd like to get started with the presentation. To begin our program, I am pleased to introduce to you Dick Barringer, Professor Emeritus at the Muskie School of Public Service, and also a very cherished colleague of mine as we all work together to make our place here in the world even better. And with that, I would like to invite Dick up to the stage.
There we go. Great. Good morning to you all. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Let me begin by saying that I often wonder why people read and listen to things that I've had a hand in writing. The very first thing I wrote about the state of Maine was a small book in 1973 entitled The Maine Manifest, which got a certain amount of notoriety at the time. The publisher liked it so much that he asked if he could produce it as a tabloid and sell it on newsstands for 10 cents. And I said, well, it doesn't leave much room for any royalties, but sure, the hell. And it did. It sold like crazy. And then Tower Publishing here in Portland said, we'd like to publish it as a book. So they did. And that led to my, believe it or not, coming to Maine and getting a job in the administration of Ken Curtis in 1973. And one of the first things that I did was to go up to Orono to meet with a Professor Harold Young, who at that time was pushing a concept called the whole tree harvesting concept, which meant that you didn't leave all the slash on the floor of the forest, but you used almost all of it and left only what was necessary behind for nutrients for the next generation. And I, at that time, was director of the state's public lands and wanted to do a whole tree harvesting inventory to find out what the commercial value of not just of the lands for which we were responsible directly, but for the lands that we were claiming to get back from the paper companies at the time, which were about 550,000 acres of land. So I walked down the corridor, and Professor Young, he's internationally known, very famous guy, probably the most famous professor of forestry up there in my lifetime. And his door was open, and I walked in, and I introduced myself, and I said, Professor Young, I'm Dick Barringer. And he said, you're Dick Barringer. Are you the man who wrote a Maine Manifest? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, you owe me 10 cents. So I reached into my pocket, and I gave him a dime, and he said, now we can be friends. And we went on to really a wonderful time together for the next 20 years, doing a lot of very, very interesting work. So, to today. Let me see. There are several things I want to say today. Mostly I want to tell you about this recent research and to draw a few conclusions from that. But before I do that, I want to say a couple of things. One is that this is a very singular moment in the history of this city and of the region itself. We believe that The region is enjoying greater prosperity today than it has at any peaceful time since before the Civil War. Except for the three great wars that have intervened, this region has never enjoyed the kind of prosperity it does today. And the question before us is not, can we get more, but are we going to take advantage of this moment and leave something behind that we feel future generations will look back and say, wow, they did some things really great with the prosperity they were enjoying. It's also a singular opportunity moment, I think. My almost half-century of experience in this state has taught me that by comparison, Maine is a remarkably, truly remarkably open, transparent, and accessible political culture, one that welcomes participation and engagement at every level of politics and government. I've been, I don't know, dozens of places around this country, and I've never seen the like of it. It's really a remarkable place in this regard. Our goal today is to motivate you to engage and be part of Portland's and Greater Portland's future. So I've been asked here briefly, let's see, I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh, that's what I just said. There. To summarize the two reports of interest to you. Last winter, with our partners, we published our first report, Growing Portland, Not Whether But How. There we found that if Portland is to sustain its current prosperity, and for those of you who've already seen it, forgive me for just a moment, and fulfill its economic promise, for all of Maine, it must grow its workforce, given its aging population, seriously aging, broaden its property tax, given its aged infrastructure, strengthen its schools, given the demands on them today, expand its public transit, given the some 50 to 75,000 commuters who come into the city and leave it each day, largely in single-occupant vehicles, create more workforce housing and commerce along major thoroughfares and in select neighborhoods, centers on and off the peninsula, and pay careful attention throughout to matters of good urban planning, design, and investment, learning from other successful cities. This fall, we expanded on the Portland study with the Greater Portland Tomorrow, Choices for Sustained Prosperity, in which we examine, the question, what will it take to sustain today's prosperity and best address the challenges facing the region? Here in brief are our findings and recommendations. First, this is perhaps the most important statement. Cities and their surrounding metropolitan regions today drive national and regional growth, not just here, not just across the country, but across the world. Cities and their metropolitan regions now have dominant and enduring influence over the world economy. Just 600 cities worldwide account for more than 3/5 of all global gross domestic product. The Kennedy School economist Ed Glazer notes that, quote, they are the nodes that now connect our increasingly globalized and technologized world. Second, Greater Portland is Maine's dominant engine of economic prosperity now and for the foreseeable future. With 1/30 of the state's 1/30th of the state landmass, it's responsible for 1/5 of its population, 1/4 of all the jobs, and fully 1/3 of all general fund revenues for the state. Third, Portland and its metropolitan region coexist in a strong and mutually beneficial economic relationship. This needs to be better understood and more fully appreciated and acted upon. I mentioned the fact that some 50 to 75,000 people from the surrounding region that extends from Bath down into York County come here each day to earn their living and enjoy the city. Fourth, economists agree that a growing population is essential to sustained economic development. Meanwhile, Greater Portland's workforce will decline by some 5,000 workers by, say, 2030 due to its aging population. Fifth, Greater Portland can sustain its growth if it attracts enough new workers of the right kind, that is, useful and educated. What are we on now? 6, yes. 6, foreign immigrants represent a potential pool of needed workers if their identified challenges are addressed. And these have to do with language, transportation, credentials, adequate credentials, discrimination that exists, and finally, knowledge of the culture itself, which is a real barrier to the immigrants. Greater Portland lacks both depth and critical mass in many, if not most, of its economic sectors, which compromises its future. That is, most, say, for eds and meds, professional services, tourism, and food and beer. Eighth, current efforts to address workforce development issues are fragmented and inadequate to the challenge. This relates directly to the recommendations I'm going to mention. Ninth, most Portland residents support higher density housing next to neighborhood centers and villages if traffic and parking are addressed. It's no surprise to anyone. Those are the great impediments. And finally, regional efforts to address the challenges to sustain prosperity are fragmented, numerous, and in need of greater coordination and direct public accountability. I would also mention leadership, adequate leadership. So based on these and other findings, we offer 5 recommendations on which we urge people to focus our efforts going forward. First, the creation of a Center for Workforce Development at USM's Muskie School to undertake needed research and evaluation, program evaluation, and to create greater alignment between employer needs and existing educational programs. Second, the creation of a Center for Good Design, Good Urban Design, a partnership among UMA, USM, and Portland Society for Architecture to help local communities to embrace and use good planning design principles and practices. Third, the establishment of a 0.5% countywide local option sales tax for sorely needed investment in regional public infrastructure, including broadband, public transit, affordable housing, trails development, and related utilities. Fifth, a public information campaign. Oh, that's my recommendations, I'm sorry. Number 4, that Cumberland County expand its service portfolio and take the lead in combining the capacities of GP-COG, PACS, the Greater Portland Economic Development Council, and the Greater Portland Metro within the county itself. Fifth, a public information campaign conducted by the Portland Regional Chamber to build greater awareness of the need for sustainable development and the long-term civic advantages of economic growth and good urban design. In sum, Greater Portland today is an integrated economic region, has now become, in fact, an urban place. The challenge before us and the opportunity is to make it an even better place of broader opportunity and even greater beauty. With that, I will close with the words from my old friend and colleague at the Muskie School, Charlie Colgan. The whole notion of an urban Maine, he wrote, is unsettling to us, in part because it conflicts with the mental images we all carry around about what it means to be in Maine and not in Massachusetts or some other place. We are a state where the vast majority of us now work in cities, live in cities or suburbs, and everyone thinks they're in the middle of the country. It is also unsettling because of a paradox. To retain Maine's special character as a place that feels closely connected with the natural environment, Maine people have to pay much, much more attention to the built environment. Put another way, to keep what is special about Maine and its natural environment, we must decide now how best to become more urban. Finally, if you'd like to read much more, it's available at this, go back. No, sorry. Is it on there? Yeah. That's the address, digitalcommons.usm.maine.edu/muskie/8. The previous study was /7, so they're both available on the Digital Commons website. Or you may purchase a copy at the low, low price of $3 out at the table. That's half of their production price. We're happy to subsidize those for you. So that's it. That's my presentation. And now to our keynote speaker for the morning. An accomplished city planner, educator, and author, she is the founder of CivicMoxie, a planning, urban design, and placemaking group in Brookline, Massachusetts. She holds a bachelor's degree in architecture from Pratt Institute and a master's of city planning from MIT, where she taught for 13 years and conducted important research on empowering communities to take charge of positive change. She is the lead author of the recent publication, Places in the Making: How Placemaking Builds Places and Community. Her work focuses on moving communities from planning to doing through what she calls a collaborative roadmap, a process developed at CivicMoxie, one that she will share with us today. She has led waterfront planning efforts in Boston and in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and recently created a master plan for the New Arts District in New Rochelle, New York. All her work encourages collaboration among working groups that is focused on building trust and enduring frameworks for action. She has served as Associate Director of the Northeast Mayor's Institute on City Design and most recently led the Manchester Connects planning effort, a project connecting people, places, and ideas in the historic Muskie Mill Yards with downtown Manchester, New Hampshire. She regularly speaks across the nation on the power of collaboration and placemaking, most recently at the Royal Technical Institute in Stockholm, Sweden in June. Please join me in giving a warm Portland welcome to our beloved and at times beleaguered city, to this year's Challenge of Change keynote speaker, Susan Silberberg. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Is everyone awake? You had your coffee? I want to talk this morning, it really is about the challenge of change, and as I like to think of it, do we think change or do we think transformation? So now that you're here to see and hear my talk, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. Everyone close, I can see you all, I know who's cheating. I'm going to ask you to think of a time in your life where change was imposed on you. It may have been a work change, a relationship, friends, family, and think about how it made you feel to have this change imposed on you. So just take a moment to do that. Get that image. Okay, if you can open your eyes, tell me, a few of you, what you were thinking. Resentful, okay? Fearful. Yeah. Tired. Anybody else? Resentful, fearful, tired. Uncertain. And disenfranchised. Okay. Change is hard. Listen to all of that. This change is so hard. When I did a little bit of a web search in preparing for this talk, there were a lot of really inspirational quotes that came up on the web. You know, how can you help change? You know, it's outside your comfort zone, but it's where the magic happened. Change is scary, but not as scary as staying the same forever. I love when the winds of change blow, some people build walls and others build windmills. So there's a lot of inspiration out there because of this scary, fearful, resentful, tired feeling we get around change. And so you've been experiencing a lot of change here in Portland. There's a lot of new construction. There are new people in the city, new uses. You're seeing things that were familiar disappear. And all of that can make you feel distrustful, anxious, tired, resentful. So what I want to do this morning is talk through that a little bit. I have up the complete city maps as an extension of this. The Portland Society of Architecture asked people to map the city. They had a blank map, a wonderful exercise. These are some of the responses, and I'll show others later that are more uplifting. But these are some of the responses to that feeling of anxiety and apprehension about change within this. And there are a couple of expletives in these, so you'll excuse those but really how people are feeling. Protect the past. Here, no luxury condos. We don't like the rich people moving in and taking over everything that we've had. Keep these neighborhoods family friendly. Now I want you to close your eyes again. I want you to think of a moment in your life where something was transformed, where your work, a relationship, it was a transformative moment that was a positive experience that got you into another place. Really get a vision of a transformation of some kind in your life. Okay, tell me how you were feeling. Hopeful. Belonging. Empowered. Connected. Energized. Yeah. Interesting, we heard connected and belonging, this sense of really being a part of something, right? This energy, this positive feeling. I want to talk this morning about how communities change that kind of helpless feeling of change coming at them to a sense of transformation, a metamorphosis during a life cycle of a city, and what that can feel like, how communities can do it, and how you're on the way to that, and how to grab hold of that. The complete city maps, others that were drawn, showed images of the future. They showed beloved things, they showed things people wanted to protect, visions of what everyone wanted, safe bike path, to have more solar public lighting, less cars, improve the metro. Look at that, awesome up there. This real sense of optimism. Visit Portland, more bike paths, more outside patios, connected green spaces. A really kind of proactive vision of what the future of Portland can be. And look at the details here. This person knows exactly where those bike paths should be, where the connected green spaces need to be. A real sense of how can you transform this city. And so what I'd like to do is think about the difference between change and transformation and what those qualities of that are for communities. And in order to do that, I'd like to shift from you thinking about the built environment and the things you don't like, the things you're resentful of, the things that are just unknown and uncertain, the construction, changes in people who are here, higher buildings, denser buildings, more traffic. And I want you to stop. And I want you to shift gears and to think about how you are in the world of Portland. Not the built environment, but you personally, an organization you might belong to, and how you act within the community. Because the transformation of thinking, of transforming as opposed to changing, really begins with a systems approach of how you are in the world. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what's needed for that transformation. When you step out of, this is what I'm reacting to in the built environment, and you think about, this is how I want to act for transformation. What I see in my work and my research is that these are things that are present, not necessarily in all of those transformations, but many of them are present in all of them. And I'd like to walk you through with a few examples here and then tie it back in to Portland and where you are and where you might go. And the first one is this sense of collaboration, and it ties back when you were thinking about transformation. The words that came up were connected and belonging. And you do that through collaboration. And this really ties back to research I did at MIT around this notion of placemaking, which is really the act of people coming together in their physical environment to deliberately, and that's a really important word, to deliberately design, plan, program, and maintain public spaces, to facilitate social interaction and to improve your quality of life. And it's not just showing up at a public meeting. Notice it isn't just to come together to give an opinion. It's all of those active things after that. I want to talk briefly about a project in Bernal Heights in San Francisco, and really illustrates this notion of collaboration quite well. This neighborhood was 6 lanes wide on this street, on Guerrero Street in San Francisco. And neighbors on one side of the street didn't know neighbors on the other. So you can picture there's really kind of the equivalent of a freeway width going through your neighborhood. And some residents likened it to a traffic sewer. That's what they call this street. And regularly there were problems with cars going so fast that they would actually just crash into people's living rooms on that street. And one day, a resident was really fed up with this, and she went door to door to try to get everyone together to think about doing something. And it really took that personal door-to-door, come work with me, in order for this community to come together and to go to the city and to say, we need something done about these 6 lanes of traffic. Now, San Francisco is pretty much like every other city. You don't have funds for absolutely everything you want to do. And so San Francisco Department of Transportation came back with a proposal and said, we'll put up some seed money, but if you can raise the rest of the money in this neighborhood and you can figure out how to share not just the construction of helping do traffic calming on the street, but also the ongoing maintenance of doing this, because we don't have the funds for another park. We'll go ahead with this project. We'll provide the planning money and the design money. We'll give some seed money, and we'll do a kind of temporary park here, which is about all we can afford. And the residents came together, and they raised their half of the money. And perhaps most importantly, they had to figure out how to be in this community together. They had to figure out what house the hose and the gardening implements were going to be at that month, and how they were going to rotate that schedule of responsibilities to take care of the park. And so that whole process of maintaining and building this park really built a community of connections here. And so going from the 6-lane wide traffic sewer to a completed park enabled them to begin to connect across to their neighbors on the other side of the street, made a connection to the city, which was actually the beginning of San Francisco's Pavement to Parks program, and created this collaborative, really success story that showed what can happen in a world of limited resources for all of us, when people can come and put their heads together, not only in a community, but also with city government. There are lots of stories like these. You can read my white paper, which is less than a nickel or a dime online. You can download it for free. That show that this widening emphasis away from products, away from the actual park or the bench, to focus on the process is really recognizing long-term importance of nurturing community capacity and local leadership. And this mutual stewardship of place and community is what we've called at MIT the virtuous cycle of placemaking. Because if you're looking at the whole span of a project, there's an entry point here for almost everyone. There's some way to come into a project. It might be organizing because you want to get something done, that woman going door to door, or deliberating and having public meetings. Or perhaps you're the team of, you're giving pro bono from the landscape architecture office and you're helping with design, or the foundation that's raising money. All along this cycle is an opportunity for community to connect and to build projects and to improve quality of life. And so in this mutual stewardship of place and community, community transforms place, which in turn transforms community, and so on. Another quality is many projects, not all, but many, are proactive, not reactive. It's about saying, I'm going to take charge of a situation, and I'm going to determine the outcome. Because change is inevitable, but progress is optional. You could change here in Portland, but show no progress. But not changing is not an option. You can't hold everything still right where it is. It will wither and die. Cities are living organisms. You cannot stop them from changing, as much as everyone would love to see that happen in places around the city. And so your only choice is death or progress. It's not a difficult choice. And this being proactive, the other magic I've learned from this is that it brings people together, because coming together around positive actions, as opposed to with rancor and bitterness and resentment, is a much more joyful experience of collaboration. And so that's a bit of magic in and of itself. And I want to talk about a proactive movement that's spreading across the country and around the world, which is, instead of saying no, not in my backyard, instead of saying I'm reacting to this, people are coming together to say yes in my backyard. YIMBY. Yes, I want change, and that process of saying yes makes me a partner with the change agents. When you say no, you're not a partner. When you say yes, you are a partner. And this is mainly groups of people in high housing cost areas, and I would put Portland in that category, who have said saying no to increasing the supply of housing is raising our housing costs. And if we can say yes to housing, we can get more supply, which will reduce our housing costs, and we have control over what kind of housing we want. And it's a growing movement that is really looking at being proactive and partners in that development process, as opposed to being reactionary and stopping. Clear and specific vision is very, very important. You have to know where you're going in order to get there. And the more specific you can be, the better. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a project, and I don't like to say that we just finished this project at CivicMoxie, because I think it's just begun. Matter of fact, they just had a launch event 2 weeks ago. Manchester Connects is a project where the vision came from a group of citizens that had been working for a long time to get a river walk along the Merrimack River in the Mill Yard in downtown, and it's never quite gotten off the ground. And they came together about 3 or 4 years ago now, and started talking. 3 former mayors, former economic development director, head of the Chamber of Commerce, a whole group of people, citizens, property owners, and said, we really want to do this. They did this without official sanction from the city. City Hall wasn't on board, although the planning department was supportive. And they came together and they got a DOT grant from New Hampshire DOT for a multimodal land use multimodal transportation and land use study, because that's where the money was. And we looked at that project. CivicMoxie got the project, and we rebranded it almost immediately, because I don't know anyone who gets excited about a multimodal transportation and land use project, except maybe some transportation engineers who I love dearly, but it wasn't going to get the rest of the community excited. And we came together and thought about what that project was really about, and it was about belonging, and it was about connectedness. And that fit pretty well with multimodal. And so those citizens came together and had a vision that that whole city that has so many extraordinary things going on would be connected, and everyone wouldn't necessarily have to agree on everything, but they would all be moving in the same direction. Because the frustration in Manchester is that all the parts are so wonderful and they can't quite figure out how to make it more than that. It never quite gets to the level they want it to be at. And so this idea about just taking the organizations and the spaces and the people and bringing it together in some way to be connected. And I would say that there are great similarities here with Portland. And that project involved the downtown, the Mill Yard, the Riverwalk, and it really was focusing on history, but it was all about moving toward the future. And they were very clear they were not going to let history tie them down. That if Manchester was a city about innovation, that they were going to continue to be innovative, that they couldn't get stuck and say, that's it, that's a snapshot in time. And so they were thinking about what do we do? And the recommendations that came out of that were about celebrating public space, being host to a world-class river walk and an iconic pedestrian bridge, encouraging dense mix of land uses, supporting innovative parking strategies, embracing complete streets, and powered by a new organization called Manchester Connects. And so it appears that the Chamber of Commerce is going to be kind of the host for that organization instead of spinning off for a new one. And that's going to be the leader for this new effort that brings together the chamber and economic development and businesses and landowners to say we're going to move forward. And their launch project, because they felt they really had to demonstrate they could do something, is this pedestrian, bicycle connected, accessible loop from Elm Street down to the Mill Yard and the Riverwalk. And we're doing kind of temporary, what we call tactical urbanism. And they know they're going to need everyone on board for this. So that diagram on the left is a pretty typical diagram of how to get projects done and how to move things and transform things in cities. They don't have government in here so much at the local level. City Hall still isn't on board. But city planning is helping as much as they can, and they've rallied, so we've done these action kits for them. And everyone's taken an action kit on a different topic, and they're running with it. Because they know they can do this. They can do this even without City Hall. And they had their launch event 2 weeks ago. It's my favorite picture ever on the right, that little dog on the Manchester Connects symbol. A great success. These are some of the founders of the group who started. But very excited to be moving. And they have a very clear vision. They are just going straight for that vision. So you've got the vision, and now you need indicators of success. How are you going to know if you're on the right track, and what are those indicators so that you know if all of your policies and your efforts are where they should be? Questions like, how many units of housing do we need to house people? How many affordable units would we need in town? How many knowledge workers do we want to attract? How many new businesses need to be here? How many miles of bike paths? How many new art patrons do we need to make sure that our arts and cultural organizations are healthy and solid? How many fewer crimes would we like committed? How many more engaged citizens? Picking measurable ways to measure success is very, very important. So you can give us a scorecard, and you can also say, well, wait a minute, that policy really isn't on track. It's not going to get us where we want to go. We have a collaborative road mapping process at CivicMoxie. It's not perfect. We kind of made it up because we were seeing these things happening in communities, so it's constantly changing. But it's really about taking a simple idea with a group of people and saying, what do you want to achieve? And then breaking it into smaller goals. And then breaking it into smaller and smaller goals, and then really evaluating each one. Do we have the capacity to do that? Do we have the people? Do we have the resources? Do we have the political will? And if we don't, can we get them? And then we have to bring those people into the conversation right away. And maybe it's something you put on the side for a while until you can hone down on how you want to move forward and you have everyone on board in that process to go forward with that. So along with that comes the need to be transparent. And that includes being inclusive, so that everyone knows what you're doing. They may not agree with it, but that everyone knows and there are no suspicions. So this collaborative road mapping process happened in Manchester in working group meetings that we set up that were advertised. Anyone could join a working group. And, head of the chamber was there. Former mayors were in that working group, met every 2 weeks. Anyone could come to that meeting, and they did. And if they were willing to work and stick with it, they stayed, and some people came and then they left again. And at the end, we had that core group of about 20 people who were ready to move forward on the project. City planners were there in the room. We had public works, we had parks. So we had the right people in the room. And because of that transparent process, we had a lot of support for what the final projects were that we chose to move ahead. And then the advisory board, our recommendations for that, and it's changing as they're pulling it together, which really have a wide spread across the community. There's another part to transparency that I kind of a subpart, education. It's really important that everyone make educated decisions as much as you can. So I'm going to, every place we work, I hear from neighborhoods they want a coffee shop, and some neighborhoods still even hold out for an independent bookstore. And these many times are the same neighborhoods who are telling me that growth is happening and it's too much and they don't want any more housing in their neighborhood. And I'll say to them, if you don't want more housing in your neighborhood, you're not going to get a coffee shop. And they kind of look at me and say, why won't the city give us a coffee shop? And it takes a lot of explanation to understand that those locational decisions about the coffee shop are made by companies who look at how many households are in that neighborhood and what the disposable income, median income level is. And they've got formulas, and they're going to decide how many coffee shops exist and so many, square miles, and they're going to figure out if you can do that. And that if you have more density, you have more services and you have more of what you want. And that's a real eye-opener for some people. And that whole transparency is also about education and frank discussions about what you can have and what you don't necessarily have within that. Because at the end of the day, you've got planning and you've got implementation, and there's this whole gap in between of resources and capacity. And we have to figure out how to meet that. Some of that might be met with money, might be met with a grant. It could be volunteer, it could be philanthropy, it could be city money. It might be met by just saying, we're going to provide more density. We're going to recruit more tourists. All of those have trade-offs that then have to be discussed because there are negatives and positives. But it's on the table for what might happen. Because at the end of the day, no city that I know of has the funds and the resources to do it alone. And more, they're about partnerships. How do we connect, and how do we make sure that this inclusive process actually brings advocates to the table that can get a project done? And then there's trust. And so that trust comes from all of those other processes, and there's really no way to substitute in. You can't just show up at a meeting and say, trust me. I have two quick stories about trust and how people have come together, and one of them I was involved with in a tangential way and was on the board then for a while. The Joshua Bates School in Boston is an art center. It's an old elementary school in the South End, priciest real estate in Boston in the South End right now and when this was built. And the Joshua Bates School was given for use to artists. There are 20 affordable art studios there, very low-cost art studios. And the land around it was owned by the Boston Redevelopment Authority, and in 2003, the Boston Redevelopment Authority put out an RFP for development of the land around the Joshua Bates School, and the Joshua Bates School was part of the development parcel. And I happen to know very dearly one of the sculptors, and he called me up, and he said, the developer's coming, that's the end of our lives, I've got to find other studio space. And I happen to know the developer, New Atlantic, because it's a mission-driven developer. And he does a lot of artist space, did Midway Studios conversion a few years ago. He's committed to these kinds of projects. And I said, give Peter a chance. And Alan said, this is not going to happen. And he rallied all of the artists together. They made a big protest. And I said, you have to trust the process. And so what basically happened was the Joshua Bates studio is now permanently in management and organizational structure that the artists control that studio. It is managed by the developer in a very savvy way to keep costs down. Artists are on the board as well as the developer. I was on the board for a while as kind of an outside advocate. And then this whole project built up around a called Art Block, which has 20 affordable artist live workspace. The school is just workspace, plus luxury condos in the building as well. And the luxury condos made the rest of the project doable. And now that is permanently protected space within that. And that trust had to be developed over time. I'm going to go through this very quickly. Worked in Santurce, Puerto Rico, and San Juan. Poorest as well as richest neighborhood in Puerto Rico. You can see those census tracts up there along the water, very wealthy. Down below, not so much within the neighborhood. And there's a piece of property that was cleared for urban renewal, and everyone was forced off of that site. Poor people, really extraordinarily, desperately poor people, a number of years ago. And there was a mixed-use project that started around it, and that project went bankrupt. Puerto Rico has been struggling for a long time, even more than it is now after the horrific hurricane events. And a developer from Greenwich, Connecticut came down and bought that mixed-use property and moved his family there and did something that no other developer from the mainland ever did, is he hired all local Puerto Ricans to run that project with him, trying to build trust. But the holdouts in the neighborhood met with me and they said, we have to protest this. He wants to lease that land to build a park, and we have to stop him. And I said to them, this was the head of museums, people, and I said, you want a park, why do you want to stop him? He can't develop it. He's going to take it from us. He's going to say it's a park and it's going to be a parking lot. And I said, do you have money for the park? We think it's going to take $7 to $10 million for that park. And they said, no, we don't have any money for the park. And I said, why don't you go talk to the developer? And we can't talk to the developer. 8 months of discussions before they finally were able to talk to the developer, who was waiting to talk to them because he knew he needed them. He wanted to know what the community wanted and wanted them on board to move ahead. He's just managed to lease the land from the government, and he's going ahead with paying for the park improvements and has asked the neighborhood to pitch in terms of maintenance and can they be involved in kind of a community effort on maintenance. And so the neighborhood's going to get their park and beginning to build trust. And then the last piece of this is leadership. Absolutely critical. I saved the best for last. Strong leadership in order to be transformative in terms of change. I'm going to go through this very quickly. I spoke at a placemaking conference in Oklahoma at the State University this spring, and the keynote speaker at the luncheon was Mayor Jim Brainerd of Carmel, Indiana. Has anyone ever heard of Carmel, Indiana? Extraordinary leader. He got up there and mesmerized us, was supposed to talk for 40 minutes. An hour and a half later, we were all waiting. Give us more, give us more. Carmel was voted the #1 best place to live in America in 2012. It's also the fastest growing town in America. Think about that. The fastest growing place is also the best place to live. It's possible. It's within reach. And what he did was he said, we're going to take charge of change. This is what it looked like at the top, and this is what it looks like at the bottom at the entrance to the Arts District. He created an arts and design district that had nothing there. It was an empty field and a warehouse. And he put up those 2 brick, at the top right, 2 brick pylons, and his opponent in the mayoral election in the late 90s made fun of him. They cost $200,000. And his opponent said, there's nothing there. Why are you wasting everyone's money? And he had a vision. There are over 120 arts and design businesses in that art and design district now, in Carmel, Indiana. And he's used development as a way to pay for everything that the community wanted. And so he talks about density. That's been transformed now into this corner in a matter of 20 years. And he said our zoning only allowed for 2 stories, but that meant they were going to have to put surface parking on the lot. And that meant we weren't going to get as much tax revenue, and it was going to be ugly. So I let them do 2 stories underground of parking, and I let them build a lot more density, and now we're getting 4 times the amount of tax revenue, and we have a beautiful building to boot. And he's really got the economics of this figured out. And he's done this. These are some of their accomplishments, just from 2004 to 2008. He is on a roll. And they've built a whole city center site here by saying, you know what, if we can say to developers, yes, we can do more density, you're going to have to give us excellent design in public spaces, a lot can happen. This is what the city center site looks like today, including this concert hall here on the left. They've just built it recently. And so he's managed to take kind of talking with developers and understanding development economics and get what the community wants through a very open, inclusive process with community members, including bike paths and bike trails. So I want to just talk a little bit about moving forward here. These are the principles and vision that came out of the comprehensive plan that was just released by the city. Equitable, sustainable, dynamic, connected, secure, and authentic. There are a lot of things in here. And thinking about how do you move forward, I see the path as one of a kind of systems approach of looking at all of the amazing things that are going on in Portland and saying, how can we align these things, and how can we really make sure that we are getting the most for what all of our efforts are? I did a little quick list with some people I've been working with here of things that are going on in the city, right? How do all these align? Well, what I would urge you all to do, kind of give a challenge, is to take each of these and to think about what are the goals. Have everyone who's working on these things really kind of write out very clearly what your goals are. Think about your areas of interest. How do they overlap? And then what are these areas of alignment between them? And get together and start talking. Because the reality is, if you look at some of the goals of the city, if you want to increase the workforce and job opportunities, and you want to support arts, and you want to strengthen schools, all of those things are tied together. And sitting in one room and talking about that alignment and talking about how you can get there is actually easier than you think. But it has to be a conversation. It's not going to happen any other way. And if everyone's working in their silos, you're going to have a lot of good projects that everyone has worked on really hard, but not necessarily going to equal kind of greater things. And I challenge you to think about who's going to lead this, because the city cannot do it alone. And you already have great leadership that started in this collaboration. But who's going to take the charge? In places that we see where things are transformative, it might be a community foundation that puts in some seed money to have someone who can be full-time kind of leading and convening the groups of people, including the city, and everyone making joint decisions. Maybe it's some civic-minded business that's willing to step up to the plate, or a series of area organizations that come together. But it needs leadership in order for it to truly happen and for everyone to be moving in the transformative way that you really want to be and that you want to leave for the next generation here. The end of the day, for me, placemaking isn't about making a place, a physical place, as much as it is making a place at the table. And the more people that can come to the table under leadership, the more that you can accomplish here in Portland. So I thank you very much, and I can't wait to see what happens here. We had intended for a few questions around my talk before the break, and I kind of blanked on all of that. So maybe 5 or 6 minutes if you have any questions about my talk, and then we're going to go right into the panel. And I also want to remind you that there are about 12 fabulous organizations and groups out in the lobby, and please look at that as you're leaving. Yes?
You referred to your South Boston. Thank you. You referred in your South Boston segment there about BRA, and it brings up the whole question in my mind of a redevelopment authority and the value of such an organization, and should we consider one for Portland?
Yeah. I can't tell you what to do in Portland. I can tell you that people in Boston have a love-hate relationship. They're now the Boston Planning and Development Agency, BPDA. The BPDA and the BRA before it, same organization, has been able to accomplish an extraordinary portfolio of projects and initiatives because of that kind of combined power of planning and development. With power comes great responsibility. So you have to think about that. But in the end, what it's doing is it's institutionalizing a very collaborative approach. So there are other ways to get at some of that with a lot of really good communication and alignment of goals and actions. So there's a good argument for why you might want something like that, but obviously cautionary tales as well. Yeah.
Hi, could you just make a quick speak to geography and the landscape? Because I see cities like in Indiana, they can grow in 4 directions maybe, and in Atlanta. I mean, we're hemmed in here and really can only go west, I think, for some of the growth. So just to mention about that.
Sure. You're hemmed in. Many would say that that's a benefit. If you're thinking about an environmental approach and thinking about sustainable development and growth and how you might want to target growth to areas that already have existing services, infrastructure, public services, then that works out pretty well in your favor. Indiana's a pretty special case, but most of the places we work are pretty limited in terms of where you can grow. And there are always opportunities to kind of reinforce and support existing neighborhoods in that way. And I'd say taking much more of a kind of sustainability approach of infill and redevelopment and supporting kind of existing neighborhoods. Yes.
Well, in Carmel, Indiana, how did the collaboration work? I mean, you had a very strong mayor with a very strong vision. And how did he use collaboration to, do you know how he did that?
I don't know all the details. I would say that he's very clear that there was a strong public input process. He also, at the talk, and you can see his talk online, by the way. If you go to Oklahoma Placemaking and put in Carmel, Indiana, the whole the video of his talk is there. He's very clear that there was great public process. He was also really clear that not everyone might agree with the building styles they chose. You know, he brought in some architects from Europe as well as local architects because he wanted that kind of walkable, sustainable feel for Carmel and thought that they would have good things to say. But he also has said that it didn't really matter, that what mattered was high quality design and really high quality public space and services. And those buildings could look like anything as long as it was high quality. So they have a public process there. The one thing I neglected to mention, I was telling someone on the break, I believe it's the town with the most roundabouts in the country. They have 110 roundabouts and no traffic lights anymore. They were very concerned about traffic and congestion. They did a few test roundabouts, and they're very tight turning radius. They're not these kind of big whipping things. And cars really have to slow down to go through them. And so all the pedestrian fatalities and accidents went way down to the point where they haven't had any in a long time because there's no way to speed through a roundabout as you might go through a yellow light. And so it's managed to ease up all of the congestion and the backup at lights, and everyone is quite happy. And I think they're up to about 112 roundabouts now. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to let you guys do the picking.
So my question is about Carmel as well in terms of, you know, a big phenomenon of what happened there was they basically were grabbing people from other parts of that urban metropolitan area. And that's the problem. A lot of this growth is sort of a zero-sum game. You, Carmel, are growing rapidly and doing it right and making a great community, but you're doing it largely at the expense of Center City and Indianapolis and some of the other surrounding, you know, older suburbs. And that's basically what's happened here in Portland. I mean, we've had tremendous growth over the same 20-year period that Carmel has, with all the surrounding communities, you know, rapidly increasing their population, basically all at the expense of Portland. And now we're trying to capture that magic in the bottle for Portland again, but it's almost too late. The cat's out of the bag. All these people are all in the surrounding communities, and they're probably never going to come back. So it's, you know, we're basically trying to find people from outside of Portland, outside of Maine, to come here. And I just wanted to understand how, you know, how do you keep in mind the fact that Carmel has to grow at somebody else's expense?
Well, you're assuming that the whole pie isn't growing, either by immigration or coming from other places, or, you know, just a growing in the population by birth rate over time. I would say that there are lots of ways that cities grow. You know, certainly I do a lot of work around arts and culture, and certainly there's a migration of artists based on affordability that isn't even necessarily that regional. But they're priced out of one market. They go to another market. People move for job opportunities, for a better quality of life, and they're not necessarily moving from within the region, but they're coming from further afield. It's lifestyle or life cycle choice. So I think that people come for different reasons, and thinking about who you want to attract. You know, some of the reports that were presented are really looking at workforce development and thinking about economic development, because without skilled workers and knowledge workers and a younger population, there's a kind of vicious cycle going on here right now, where you move to Maine for a lifestyle choice. You wouldn't necessarily move here as a career choice, because there's not a lot of room, there's not enough of an employment base to, if you needed to change jobs or you lost your job, where do you go? Chances are, unless you're close to retirement age, you may indeed have to move to find another job. And so thinking about, is that how you want to continue, or do you want to attract some sectors here that create enough of a cluster that people are moving here also for work, and they're coming out of college, they're making a choice because millennials want to be places where there's a higher quality of life, where they're connected to the outside, where they don't, more than 50% of millennials don't own a car. And many of them say that they never do want to. I suspect some of them may change their mind when they have children, but others will not. And I certainly know millennials now, getting into their next life cycle in Boston, of families and children who don't own cars. And that really changes how you think about growing Portland if all of a sudden out of the equation are kind of the traffic and congestion. And the whole nother realm I didn't talk about is, how is Portland planning for major changes in technology and disruption in the transportation industry? We do quite a bit of work in affordable elderly housing and what I call whole communities, and thinking about what every community needs for all points on the life cycle. And if you think about driverless cars and how that might change how streets are used and the need for parking, that's coming, that's here in some places, testing right now. And that's going to really affect how you think about development and what land use is. So I kind of veered off your original question, but I don't think it's always just pulling from one part of a region to feed another. And I would argue, and maybe it's my planner's optimism, it's never too late.
When you talked about the places that have been successful in addressing change or transformation, people in the communities were represented in that transformation. And I look at Portland as a pretty diverse city, and this is not a diverse group.
Right.
And you talked also about the potential workforce of our immigrant population. It's there, it's here. Yep. And yet how do we reach the diverse population of Portland, have that diversity represented in our group, and also their needs addressed by this group? Yeah. Because many of the people who are coming to our country as immigrants have a wealth of experience. Yeah. It might not be transferable credential-wise when they get here. People might come with a medical degree from their country, but if they wanted to use that when they come here, they have to go through all the process.
Right. That's right.
But we have a wealth in our immigration sector.
So I think my experience is you have to go to them, and they're not going to come to a planning meeting. You engage those populations as you begin to act. And I think Creative Portland scene, that Dinah and I were just talking about that. You begin and you ask, you go to them and you ask. But you need to see change and transformation, in a sense, for that to kind of steamroll on itself. It's very difficult. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of listening, and it takes some representation of action in order for that to really move forward. But there are places in the community, just my work on the cultural plan, of the cultural organizations working in the schools and working in that way. So things are happening, and it's a question of how do you make it grow. I'm going to stop the questions because we have an amazing panel up here, and I want to make sure that we get to them. So what our format is that I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce himself or herself, and do about a 3-minute response or comment to my talk or something that was brought up here today, or theme, and then they're all going to go, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Christine? Yeah.
So, I'm Christine Grimando. I'm a senior planner with the City of Portland. And I work on a variety of projects, but the project that I've been most engaged with over the last couple of years was the city's new comprehensive plan, Portland's Plan 2030. And over a period about 18 months, we worked on the plan. It just got adopted this summer. And it's a high-level policy document for the city. It's a vision for the city for the next decade or so, and Susan threw up the vision statement up on the screen there of the sort of highest level of what our goals are. Those are equitable, sustainable, connected, dynamic, authentic, and one more that I don't have in front of me. Sustainable, thank you. In addition to that vision, it contains a lot of recommendations about the future of the city regarding things like housing and transportation, historic preservation, environment, our waterfront, culture, and economy. It contains a number of recommendations, hundreds of them, goals and strategies for the community. And it was built, I think the important thing to emphasize that it grew out of about 18 months of community conversations of various kinds. We had over 40 meetings. We talked to thousands of people. There was a survey. And the sorts of meetings we had were really varied in type, in content, in scale, in geography, in time of day. And we made it a point to try and diversify the way we do this work. And so it was an amazing process. It engaged a lot of the community. That is not to say it was a perfect process. And so, we did think we engaged with the schools more substantively than we ever had, our high school students and our middle school students. We engaged with the homeless community, some of the immigrant community, First Fridays, farmers markets. We were pretty much ubiquitous in the community. It felt to me. And that said, it was not a perfect process. I think there were, ways that we just scratched the surface as far as engaging with people who are not so engaged right now, whether it's new immigrants or whether it's people who are otherwise limited in time or interest or engagement. And we began to try to crack those barriers a little bit as far as what our traditional engagement was. That said, I want to speak to something that was said today about the conversation being so important. And I think what I would add to that is that it's not a single conversation, and I don't think it was meant necessarily as a singular, but this plan that we did became as much about the process as about the product. And it is ongoing, and the plan really supports the fact that we will continue to engage and be responsive and transparent, and iterative is a word we like to use a lot these days. So that became sort of as big a part of what the plan was as any of the other recommendations in the plan on any particular policy area. So that said, I want to just address the issue of process versus product, because we also have product that we need to think about. And so process is critical. Community partnerships and capacity building is critical. I certainly cannot do all we've set out to do as a community in that plan and elsewhere on my own or my department or my city. But we also do have a role in sort of shaping a conversation about why our goals for housing, for growth, for the economy, for the environment, for culture and engagement and inclusiveness here in this place are best met by this place as much as anywhere in the region, that this city can and needs to meet a lot of these challenges, and that we really do have goals to meet. And I think one of our jobs and one of my jobs is to also meet that conversation with a framework about why these issues that we're grappling with of affordability, of angst, of transportation and our complete streets, and so many other issues are issues we really have to meet. So I think I just wanted to emphasize that the conversation and the product, the process and the product, they really do go hand in hand. And to my mind, we have to keep moving forward in that conversation. That said, I'll wrap up. I'm past my 3 minutes. I will say.
I'm going to have to give everyone else one.
Yes, you will. And I will say that this process, just to focus on the comprehensive plan a lot, there are many things that the community is concerned about. Whether it's affordability, whether it's homelessness, whether it's, again, change and all these other things. But there was so much that was positive and so much common ground about what people love about their place. I think for that alone, it's something we need to revisit again and again as things remain contentious, as full agreement sometimes eludes us, that it provides a tremendous amount of common ground going forward.
I'm Peter Mills from the Maine Turnpike. I'm a little overdressed, but at my age, when you get up early on a Saturday morning, you figure it's for a funeral, either your own or somebody else's. I've got 5 quick points to make in 3 minutes, so take notes. First thing is, I think I'm 74 years old. I grew up in both Farmington and Portland, and I've practiced law in Skowhegan and been in the legislature from Somerset County, and I've been working for the last 6.5 years down here. I am the epitome of the two Maines. But the thing I've learned from following what's happened to Portland since I was wandering the streets in the 1950s, is that the first thing we've learned over the last 7 decades is we need to preserve what's really good about this. So we have to decide very early on in the planning process, what are we going to protect at all costs? The Victorian mansion came within 2 weeks of becoming a Shell station in 1940. And there are stories that most of you are familiar with about many other structures and neighborhoods. I grew up in Gorham, and I was there at the end of the time when all the gas stations took over the houses, the taverns that had been built in 1790. I grew up in a house that was built in 1794, and my father arranged to have moved so that the bank wouldn't destroy it when they bought the property. Anyway, we need to preserve what's good because that is the magic of what Portland is all about. The old port, which used to be for drunken longshoremen when I was 10 years old, is now what it is today. Still drunks, I think, but in any case. There's a lot to save, and that's the first lesson I would suggest. Second thing is, to echo the speaker today, we have to say YIMBY. The people with money, the people addressed in these suits, people with a lot more money than I have, are not going to spend it unless you tell them what you like and what you want, and you make it an invitation to do something creative and welcome them, welcome capital with an engagement and a partnership. That is absolutely crucial. I'm so glad to see the chamber here today, Quincy. But we need people like Mike Dubiak. We need other people with access to capital to engage in this process. Third thing is, I don't know about you, but I think my guess is that roughly 95% of maybe the world's population cannot envision in space. I have always hired architects to help with any structure that I'm trying to overhaul or anything that I get involved. Why? Because they have that capacity that I lack. And people need to be stimulated by a vision, a picture, drawings, and all the kinds of things that architects come by almost innately, but are trained to stimulate us with. And absent that, you can't get people to decide what they want. They have to see a picture of it to say, oh yeah, I want to engage to be that, these river walks and that sort of thing. And we have to go to other cities, like Barringer has been to St. John and other places and come home with photographs saying, here's what it could be. So the fourth thing I would say is you can't plan with too much precision because technology is going to pull the rug out from under you. I like to say that I think the history of the 20th century, if you wanted to summarize it in one sentence, was that we human beings adapted ourselves to the internal combustion engine. that has driven most of the decisions we've made about where we live, how we move around. The internal combustion engine is on its way out. We're right now at about the place where horses were in 1917, 100 years ago. Those things are going. They're going to be electric. They're going to be self-driven. Imagine this. It's going to be legal to be sitting in a vehicle, sipping scotch and smoking marijuana. Because Google is driving you. And you probably won't want to own the damn thing, because these electric cars are going to be roaming around on their own, picking up people in response to their cell phones. And the good news, we won't need as much parking. That's going to transform cities. We probably will need as many highways or connections as we have today, but we won't need as much parking. And then the fifth thing I wanted to say is I want to call out Patrick Costin's vision. And he's an architect. He's one of the people I'm talking about who needs to create these visions to stimulate us. But he created a vision at Eggs and Issues a few months ago about walkable neighborhoods and how Portland, that's what people are so engaged about on the peninsula and also in places like out on Stevens Avenue in the neighborhood of those three big schools, where you can walk to a coffee shop, maybe not a bookstore, but out there on Stevens Avenue, there's a shoe shop. You can get your shoes repaired. There's so much you can do within walking distance in some of the neighborhoods in Portland. West End has such a neighborhood, really. Certainly Munjoy Hill. We need to stimulate these neighborhoods. Why? Because for several 100,000 years, we have been walking around on two legs, and no matter what technology does to us, we're going to still walk on them. And we love walking on them, and it's the way to maintain your own health, and it's the way to get your dog out of the house in the morning. So, I mean, it is an essential, I think it's a safe harbor for planning to say, well, I'm not sure what the future is going to bring with regard to transportation and the automobile and transit and everything else. It's reasonably safe to say that walkable neighborhoods are a really good bet. That's my speech. Thank you.
That's great. Well, Peter was just talking, Peter was talking about autonomous vehicles and got me thinking a little bit about this region and how we, as a region, have a lot of collective decisions to make. Peter's vision of what the autonomous vehicle would look like is a choice. I mean, we could have small electric shared vehicles that free up land for more development and less car space in cities, or we could have SUVs that are self-driven that people get dropped off in the morning in Portland and then go back out and go back in and go back out and have a lot more miles driven, a lot more wear and tear on the roads. So that last example to me is a great one about us needing to come together collectively as a region to make decisions and shape the growth that is inevitable that Susan talked about. I'm talking about the region because I'm the executive director of the Greater Portland Council of Governments. We're an agency of 26 cities and towns. Portland is one of our members. We go all the way out to Sebago Lake, up to Freeport, down to Cape Elizabeth. And we are engaged in trying to build regional prosperity and strengthening our cities and towns to engage in building our economy, making sure we have great transportation, affordable housing, and preserving, as Peter said, the things that are most precious to us about the region as a whole. So I want to challenge you to think beyond being a resident of your own street and your neighborhood, beyond being just a resident of Portland, but really you are a resident of the region. And to illustrate my point, I want to ask you a couple questions. The first one is, what does Portland bring to the region? Dick gave you a couple good hints. What is the contribution that Portland makes to the region? Anyone? Jobs. What? It's a service center. Yep. Healthcare. Eds and meds. Yep. Dinah, I know where you are. Arts and culture. Parking. Brings parking. Yeah. What are some of the things maybe related to parking that aren't so great that Portland brings to the region? Traffic. Congestion. Highways. Don't say that in front of Peter.
We're trying to get him out of Portland.
Yeah, try to get him out of Portland. Social service needs. Okay, so let's flip this around. So where do you get your water in Portland? Where does it come from? Awesome. This is an educated audience. That's great. What else does the region bring you? Say, I'll give you a hint, farm to table. Yeah, restaurant, food. You get your food from the farms around here, right? Now, what are some of the things that the region brings Portland that aren't so great? Traffic, and part of that is because the affordability levels in Portland have gone down, so people have to drive till they qualify, but they're still working in Portland, right? People with needs. So most people that I talk to, probably not this audience, think that Portland generates people that are addicted to opiates or are homeless. But those people are coming here from all around the region. So there is an argument that the region shares the responsibility that Portland is right now bearing the major cost of to make sure that we're serving those people. So I threw out those questions to you to illustrate that we are very interdependent as a region. And as such, we need to be working together with our neighbors. Part of the business I'm in is getting our local electeds, like Councilor Brenneman, to meet our town councilor in Freeport or the Board of Selectmen out in Sebago, so that they start to understand that there is a shared vision that they can work together on. And we in New England are very focused on the borders around our cities and towns, but we live in a food shed, a watershed, a housing shed, a commute shed that is shared among all of these different cities and towns. And so we're trying to build a network of citizens, elected officials, and appointed officials that understand how interconnected and interdependent we are. So in order for us to use some of the principles that I think that Susan laid out about how we do that, Portland, the city of Portland, and Christine was leading this process, took a very intentional approach to figuring out how it wants to grow, what it wants to do to engage its citizens. And I would argue we need to do the same thing on the regional level, being transparent, cultivating leadership, making sure there's engagement at all levels, and really thinking through the vision. And that's the first thing, is to figure out what that vision is, what are the goals around that vision, and then starting to develop clear metrics. And there are a bunch of regional organizations that are starting to work together to say, okay, how many more housing units do we need to develop for the greater Portland region? How much do we want to try to decrease the miles driven and increase transit ridership or increase the amount of people on bikes? And we need to do that collectively so that everybody has their handprints on it. And then I think we need to have a shared agreement about where we're going to grow in the region, not just the neighborhoods, but also where we're going to preserve. We need to preserve that land around Sebago Lake in order for you to continue to have clean drinking water, and in order for our beer companies to have the competitive advantage of being able to use that clean water and grow jobs. And then we need to figure out where are our priority investments collectively. How are we going to invest in transportation? We have very limited public resources, so we need to develop those priorities. Now, I'm imagining I'm just about out of time, all right? So I'll just leave with one question to all of you, which I think we should explore sometime in another forum, which is, what's the direction that lobsters are moving right now? East and north. How about wild turkeys? They came here from the south. And how about sugar maples? Yeah. So my question is, if vegetables and plants and animals and disease are all moving north, and we've got the country burning and flooding, do we have an accelerated rate of change that's coming our way as humans start to mimic what's happening in the natural environment? And are we prepared for that? And I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer whether we're going to have a huge migration northward to Maine, but I think we ought to start thinking about it, because the rate of change that we are experiencing right now might be a lot more rapid than what we can even anticipate.
Thank you. I was at a planning conference, the New England, Southern New England Planning Conference last 2 days in Providence, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island was speaking, and he talked about particularly he's interested in climate change and kind of coastal resiliency, and he talked about when your car starts moving a lot faster, you need stronger headlights. And I would say that the kind of collaboration and thinking about this on a regional scale is kind of equipping yourselves with stronger headlights. A really good point. Everything is regional, and the borders aren't acknowledged for watershed, for resiliency, for floods, for a whole series of things. A really important thing, we can now transform this card into voting for the best quote this morning, and I vote for "It's okay to sit in your car and drink scotch and smoke marijuana." So if anyone wants to vote, we'll have a box in the back. And the winner gets an afternoon of partying with Peter. I think I have one question for the group, and it has to do with this sense of kind of YIMBY. It has a sense to do with acknowledging the regional codependency. How do you, in your roles, kind of get that message out there? How do you let a Portland resident know that it's so important to think of yourself in a kind of as part of a larger codependent, supportive community? How do you do it around transportation? How do you, Christine, get a resident to understand that decisions made locally in a neighborhood or downtown affect them as well? Just anyone want to take that?
You want me to kick it off? Sure. Well, I would say our role at the Greater Portland Council of Governments is really as a neutral convener and facilitator, and what we try to do is educate and encourage decision makers to make their policy based on data and not anecdote. And I think that the facts bear out that we are growing, and so the choice that we have to make is how we're going to grow. And I'd raise question 2 in Portland as an example right now, because that is, you're going to be voting on that in a couple weeks, and it basically would allow for a number of neighbors around a proposed development to overturn a zoning change that would allow that development that was approved through the public process. And I've heard on both sides give neighbors the voice back. The city council isn't representing the neighbors, and then on the other side, that this could be some of the worst policy for the development of affordable housing and other kinds of economic development projects. And so our role is really to bring to light what those issues are. And we're actually going to have a forum next Wednesday that some of you might be interested in at noon at our offices, where we're going to have a debate between the proponents and the opponents of question 2, and then have Q&A with the audience. And again, to try to get something that I think has been flying below the radar for people out into the light, and people to really understand what the implications would be, whether they be good or bad, from a question like that. So to answer your question, that's the role that we play in the region.
We just recently learned from some traffic analysis that only about 8% of the traffic on the turnpike that passes, that is outside of Portland to the west, that section of the turnpike, only about 8% of it is through traffic. The other 92% either originates in Portland or comes into Portland. We've become something we're sort of an adjunct to the city street system, to Portland. We have 8 interchanges from Cabela's up to Falmouth. That's enough. We have intentionally drawn traffic out of Portland by cutting the cost on the turnpike down to essentially 25 cents a trip if you are a regular user, if you use it more than 40 times a month. And you can avoid dozens of stoplights. You can avoid all the stoplights on Main Mall Road, out at Congress Street, whatever your point of congestion is. And the problems with I-295 in the middle of the city are well known to all of you. When people talk about traffic congestion, I think it's either Franklin Arterial or I-295 and Tukey's Bridge that comes immediately to mind. Tukey's Bridge has as much traffic on it on an average day as the turnpike does between Saco and South Portland. And between Saco and South Portland, it's a straight road with 6 lanes. And we're built for that traffic. So I think the turnpike has a significant tactical role, and that I think our tactical role is to try to keep the traffic out of Portland as much as possible, and to retain the thoroughfare capacity, because most of the traffic that's going through is truck traffic that wants to get to Walmart up in Lewiston, it wants to get to Poland Spring, it wants to get to the woods, into the paper mills. It's got a purpose, and it's got to get through here somehow. And the turnpike was built to absorb all of that. So that's one reason that we're going to be talking about. Right now, there's a fair amount of congestion on the turnpike west of here. It is 6 lanes up through the Scarborough exit, the South Portland exit, and it is 4 lanes from there through Falmouth. And from the traffic perspective, it appears that we need to add we need to go from 4 to 6. The good news is we already own all the real estate necessary to build it, but it nevertheless is a significant expansion of the highway system in this region. But the purpose of it, I think the beneficent purpose would be to try to keep congestion, defeat congestion on that road and draw people away from using 295 as a through road, which is happening a lot, particularly at night when you don't have, you know, the afternoon and the morning routes. But anyway, it's a problem. The route, by the way, from Cabela's up to Falmouth is 11.1 miles either way you go, because the I-295 kind of veers off toward the waterfront, and I-95, the turnpike, veers a bit toward Westbrook, but they make kind of 2 Cs, and then they come back together again in Falmouth. So it's actually quicker, and we have a higher speed limit, so it's actually quicker to use the turnpike. But a lot of people are using 295.
So I think that that the example of the comp plan is a great example of one place to sort of lay out bigger citywide issues and again start laying a sort of groundwork for this broader conversation, broader understanding of what our common challenges and responsibilities are. The comp plan talks a bit about the concept of one Portland, that all of Portland will have access to equal, though it won't all look the same, contextually appropriate, but equal amenities, as well as sharing a responsibility, bearing some responsibility for the challenges of the city too, whether it's housing, whether it's emergency shelters, or any number of things. But that the city, every part of the city should have access to open space and transit and a coffee shop and a community store. And the concept of complete neighborhoods is in there too, of walkable neighborhoods. And that is a great place for that high-level conversation. I think as projects, and it's really important to have that high-level conversation, I think as projects come forward, development projects come forward, we often see that that's where it's a great challenge to sort of balance immediate neighbor response with the larger implications of this as this meets some citywide goals. And I don't have a silver bullet answer to that. I think that is often where sort of crux of the matter of how do we span these things and sort of stitch this conversation together comes to bear. I think good data, I think a good high-level continuing to have an ongoing conversation about these things in many forms helps. I'm trying to think of a couple of examples to give you. I think the Western Waterfront is one. We recently had a rezoning process for a portion of the Western Waterfront, and there were a lot of immediate abutter concerns, legitimate concerns. It also is a project with implications for livelihoods throughout the region, and implications for the viability of us being a port city. And we worked hard to try to bring those poles closer together. I think we made a lot of progress. I don't know that everyone's completely satisfied on that, but it was work, and we had a long conversation about how to bring those concerns together and try and balance those things out. And again, not to say everyone was immaculately satisfied with that process, but that is the work of planning, the work of my department and the planning board and the council as well. I will also, I feel like I'm starting to repeat myself a lot, but this idea that the conversation, you don't sort of state something and leave the room and it's done, I think is really important for all of these issues. I think the issue of parking, for instance, is one that comes to mind. Every meeting I've ever been in as a planner in my whole professional life, parking has come up as a concern or an issue. I don't think we have to wait for self-driving vehicles to build less parking. I think we're there, but not everyone agrees. And I think, and it's a complex topic, not to be sure. I was at a meeting recently, neighborhood meeting, and I was hearing parking concerns. Again, the concerns are valid. The solutions might not be immediately intuitive to people who don't think about these things all the time. And someone in the room, that wasn't me, said, I think we need a multimodal city, and I can always park my truck within 2 blocks of my house, and let's steer this conversation differently. And I thought, it was so good that I didn't have to say all that. But 5 years ago, that might not have been true. 8 years ago, that might not have been true. And I wasn't here doing this job 8 years ago, but there has been an ongoing, growing conversation. And so I think that these things entering the sort of public lexicon and public consciousness, they're slow, and they take patience and persistence. Parking is just one example. I think housing and everything we've talked about here today follows those rules.
That's a great point. I think it's the whole argument for a systems approach of kind of setting up an enduring infrastructure for conversation that's more than just project-based. You don't come together for a project and then stop, but great point. We're going to open it up for questions to the panel. So we have 2 people with microphones, so I'm going to let them decide.
One of the topics that's only been alluded to, I guess using the word education, is really marketing and communication. And I think that the small number of people here today is one indicator of the failure of that. And other people have said they didn't even know this comprehensive planning process was going on. And as you remarked, this is a fairly well-educated crowd. I think that more people need to know more about this process and these processes, and that has to be built in systemically.
I'm going to take a quick shot at that, and then I'm sure that you can speak to this. Every planning project I've ever worked on, we can jump through hoops about getting the word out there. It's not going to reach everyone, or they're just not going to be listening. And I don't know what the solution is. I've never had a project where it hasn't been the last meeting of, let's say, a 2-year project, and I'm sure you can talk about this, maybe, yeah. And people will show up and say, you have to stop this. I never heard about this project. Why are you meeting without us? And, you know, they want you to start over. It's a challenge. I mean, I think it's a bigger challenge every year that goes by. There's more information. Everyone is getting flooded with information. Nobody reads their emails anymore. Very few people. I won't make that blanket statement. When you get a lot of emails, it's easy to miss things. Everyone is sending information about meetings and conferences. So communication is absolutely a challenge. I once made a joke with a client. We were trying to get more people at a meeting, and we did a mock-up poster in our office that said, 20-story office tower coming in your neighborhood. Come to meeting to discuss. And I could not get the client to post it. I said, everyone will show up, we'll have a full room, and we'll say, just kidding. But now that you're here, do you want to comment about that? I'm sure you did massive outreach for the comp plan.
We did massive outreach for the comp plan. And we still I've never heard of this comp plan. And so that's not a reason to stop a project, I agree. And I do think if that's always going to happen, we have to take that into account, but also with humility keep trying. To give an example of some things we try beyond the norm, we posted on the time and temp building. We had comp plan flashing. If you looked it up what it was, it would direct you to information. We had translation and interpretation services. We had childcare and food. Food always helps. We varied times of day and where we showed up. We went to people as much as we could. Again, we were in the dozens and dozens of meetings and types of meetings and locations. And so I take that critique both with a little grain of salt and with humility. We will keep trying to do this as robustly as possible and diversify and fill the room as much as we can. But not every meeting's going to be the same. There's always the next one, because there is really. For me, there's 1 in 2 days. So we'll keep trying.
And you're here today on a Saturday morning.
Yes.
Thank you. Other comments here?
Is that the one?
Yeah.
I guess I'd like to call back to Peter's comment about bringing capital to Portland with that stipulation of engagement and kind of, open it up to the panel to dig into what that engagement is. I think there's a general impression that a lot of the developments that are occurring in Portland, do not support these goals, especially with the need for a broader industry and a more robust, different sectors of industry. There seems to be a lot of very similar projects, I guess, in the city that we just have the impression that there isn't that diversity being established, I guess. So I'd like to kind of dig into that a little bit more.
I didn't explain how I thought it could happen. But, I mean, the things that we've seen, a lot of people are complaining, probably, not probably, but they are complaining with a great deal of legitimacy that rents have been going up. I own 4 rental condos in Portland, and I've sort of kept them down. But the cost of living here is going up and up and up, but there has been a capital response to that. J.B. Brown has got that huge project down on York Street. Joe's Smoke Shop has gone up, 7 stories, I think, with new housing, fairly dense housing because it's going up as opposed to out. We are a city that will not accept buildings over 7 or 8 stories. Vancouver solved its problem. Charlie Colgan likes to talk about Vancouver solved its population problem by building high-rises everywhere and then having walkable streets with retail in the ground floor. But I think capital is responding to market forces right now. And WEX, and it's not just housing. I helped to start a business park up in Oakland where T-Mobile is located now. And in those days, 20 years ago, we thought that businesses wanted to be outside of town. They wanted to be out there by the main mall, or they wanted to be someplace where their people could easily drive to. Now they want to be downtown now, and that's why WEX is moving downtown. So there's this tremendous convergence. But I think it has to come through the chamber possibly. I don't know. I mean, I go to chamber meetings, eggs and issues, and you do see people there who seem to have some control over investment decisions. And I'm so glad to see the chamber as a partner in this effort, and I think that's critical. I don't know.
First, I think I want to say that it's very hard to sort of manage specific uses at any one time. As far as the public sector's role, we don't program that specifically. We partner sometimes, we direct, we sort of shape what can happen, and then things happen. And then when we respond and sometimes change what can happen. And so, there's certain limits to how much we can sort of micromanage which kinds of development come in. That said, I think there's actually a great diversity happening right now. I think when people see another hotel come in and they're sick of hotels, it feels like we're only getting hotels. But I feel like, depending on where you look at Thompson's Point, it's really quite different from anything happening downtown. WEX is an example of a significant new development, but there's also East Bayside, which, 6 years ago, nothing was happening there, and now it's amazing as far as occupation of that sort of light industrial space. So the port, we're expanding our port, and the western waterfront, for instance, is, even before this zoning change, there's a lot happening in our shipping connections to Northern Europe and Iceland. It's sort of incredible, and stuff that just wasn't there that long ago. And so I guess I just point out some of that diversity, that there are a lot of things happening in different places depending on where you look, and it's sort of hard to zoom back and see it all. That doesn't mean we don't need to have conversations about, is it the mix we want, and looking forward, is there anything we might do to encourage, incentivize, or steer things in another direction? But I actually think it's pretty diverse right now, from my vantage point.
I want to share one anecdote. I was facilitating a public meeting of about 100 folks earlier this week around a proposed new development on a pretty large piece of land. It wasn't in Portland. And the developer had proposed a walkable community and about like, I don't know, 200 units of housing, a community park, and a community building as well. And one of the public folks who commented said she had all the right values around the environment, sustainability, welcoming people that are lower income into the community. And she said, well, I really want more open space, less density, and more affordability. Right? Now, how does that work? If you think about a parcel, you want less density, so you want people more spread out, but you want more open space. They're in direct conflict. And then if you have less density, then you can't actually build enough units so that the market rate units offset the affordability requirements. So you're telling the developer, I want all of these different things, and you're making the project financially unviable. And so that's part of the issue about attracting capital, is for the community to go through processes like Christine facilitates to try to articulate so that people understand these different goals can be in conflict. And the more the public can come together on understanding those conflicts and then deciding, okay, actually, it's more important for us to have open space and affordability. So we're going to allow for more density to allow for those two things. For example, that's the important conversation that needs to be surfaced, put sunlight on, and then moving a community towards getting consensus around how to do the development.
If I could make a simple point about, I mentioned, the speaker mentioned also about saying yes to things. Portland has already said yes to something, and you have seen it all over the city. The yes answer right now is a 4 to 7 story building with Rosemont Market in the ground floor for retail, parking at the ground level, and a mixture of condos and apartments above. We have said yes to that for Joe's Smoke Shop. We've said yes to York Street. The city has said yes to that in the West End. That is a kind of safe harbor right now. And so I think the question for the community is that the yes that everybody wants to see? Because that's what's happening now and will continue to happen. There's a lot more of them that I didn't mention, and you know where they are. But that's the current yes. Is that an adequate yes? Is that okay? I don't know.
I like your safe harbor tag.
Yeah.
It's
what it
good,
is now, and that's
right?
what people feel safe in investing in.
I think, why don't we say 2 more questions?
This is kind of a several-part question, and I think we've heard a lot of sound bites about the awful things that are going to happen if the zoning referendum should pass. And so I guess part of my question is there is a rezoning process that's going to arise out of the comprehensive plan, which may go towards answering some of the question that Peter answered in terms of how does the city become intentional about making these kinds of things happen so that we have something other than four-story buildings in this city. And so, and this is probably a tough question for you to answer, Christine, but is there a contingency plan, or kind of looking forward, if this thing should pass, what does that do to what the planning department has currently hired somebody to do and is planning on moving forward with?
I think your question gets to, and just to repeat back what you just asked me, or to clarify, coming off the adoption of a new comprehensive plan, now we're looking at how do we begin to implement this plan, and one of the big steps is redoing what we call our land use code, which includes our zoning regulations, our historic preservation standards, affordable housing standards, and many other things that impact what can happen in the built environment and the look and feel of the built environment. And so that process has just kicked off. I'm working on that currently. And I think that gets, and I think the part of your question gets to the issue of being proactive rather than reactive. This land use code that determines so much, not everything, but so much of what happens here in the city has not been redone in decades. About 50 years, it's been amended many times. And so it's a really important process for trying to line up our regulations with our newly established vision, and all these goals and strategies we've just said are really important to the city. We now are going to look at this code and say, will this code get us there? Or is there a disjoint between the two? So I will say that I am just going to keep working on this project until I'm told otherwise. It's very important, and but seriously, I think this project's not going to stop, and absolutely, if the results of the referendum will have implications for all of our lives, work lives and otherwise. But in the meantime, I'm going to assume that no matter what happens, this is time well spent, and that it's somewhere at some time, this will be work we can incorporate with some shared community consent. And so I'm just going to push ahead and keep doing my work until we know more.
I've heard about driverless cars before. I haven't heard about like driverless minivans, the idea being to reduce traffic. Is that being discussed at all? And if so, could that free up road space and thus diverting resources from things like widening highways?
My vision doesn't extend that far into the future. I mean, I read a lot of, in my job, I get deluged with articles and literature that comes over the internet and by mail about all of this. It's all they're talking about. All of the seminars and everything else, all they're talking about is electric, first of all, electric power for mobility. Secondly, autonomous mobility. And the theme in all of this is individual mobility, which can run counter to the issue of whether we build more transit. Because if it becomes so cheap, I mean, I like to analogize to the communication revolution. When I was in the service during Vietnam, I called my family to talk to my wife and my firstborn child. Didn't talk to the child, but said hello. But from Hong Kong. And I had a 3-minute call, and it cost me $12, which today would be, what, 50 bucks. And I got off the phone as quick as I could. And today we have soldiers in Afghanistan putting their children to bed by Skype every night for free. So communication over distance has been reduced essentially to a zero-cost commodity. I think that if we figure out how to take sunshine and stick that power into a pretty good battery directly, I think individual mobility is going to come close to being free in time. And I don't know what that world will look like. But the public wants it. They want to be able to, they just want to move when they want to move, where they want to go, and they don't want anything in the way. And I wrestle with this because I don't know what role the turnpike plays in all of this, but I can't quite figure out what that world is going to be. But I think that world is right around the corner.
An economic theory would say that if that is free and easy, the roads are going to be more congested.
That's the thing. Is it going to be more congested? Or are we going to be using multi-passenger vehicles that are picking up multiple people along the route in response to the cell phone inquiries, and it'll all be programmed, and so we won't need as many vehicles, maybe. I don't know.
And I think, to Christina's point, those are choices we collectively are going to need to make.
We do the long-term transportation planning for the region, and I think it's just a giant question mark about what this autonomous vehicle technology is going to do. And our role in stewarding public resources, I think, is to move it more towards electric, as Peter said, to smaller cars, and then probably even most importantly, shared cars. And that's hard in a region like ours that has a lot of rural areas, but it could also open up some great opportunities as people are aging in place in rural areas, and we have a real challenge ahead of us. Well, we have it now, but it'll even be more in the future with our silver tsunami of trying to figure out how we maintain independence for our aging population. And I think autonomous shared electric vehicles have a lot of potential to be meeting that rural transportation need as well. But the sharing has to be
Yeah.
I was going to say, sharing is where you can get at reducing congestion.
It's got to get here quickly before my doctor takes my license away, because my wife has said I should have given it up 10 years ago.
I just want to point out, I mean, this is the real beauty of a systems approach. If you think about challenges here in the city, such as the congestion in the summer with tourism in the old port, and thinking about a desire for increased mobility for citizens, particularly perhaps school-age children around the city, trying to kind of spread some of the activity out, thinking about seniors who need, and I love that term, silver tsunami. That's a good one. Is there a way to think about remote parking and charging tourists to park in remote parking that helps fund a shuttle to move through the city that others can also use? So you're using what was a nuisance in some ways about congestion and lack of parking for residents through the old port and a degradation of kind of urban quality of life, to think about how to get some services that you might need. And I was working with Cooperstown many years ago, which also has a similar problem that comes with the Little League World Series every year, which isn't affiliated with the Baseball Hall of Fame at all, but creates a lot of traffic. And hey, you know, let's get everyone out of town and take the shuttle in so we can get some of our quality of life back. But that's kind of a systems approach. How can you take one problem and think about how a solution might serve some others? And I think there's a lot of overlap in Portland for that kind of thinking, a lot of opportunity. Is that it?
I think there's a lot more that people would like to talk about, and the great thing is this is a conversation that's going to continue. So, but for now, we'd like to thank our panel, our speaker, and all of you for coming on a beautiful Saturday morning. Before I let everyone rush out of the room, I just wanted to reflect on a couple of things. First of all, my name is Patrick Costa, and I'm the current volunteer president of the Portland Society for Architecture. I'm also a soon-to-be outgoing 9-year board member of Creative Portland. And this has really energized me because Susan's telling us as organizations collaborating around issues of growth and change that we're going in the right direction. So that's makes me even more committed to continuing this conversation, which with UNE as a partner, we're now going to be every fall meeting around this time to continue dialogue around this. Our organizations are going to continue parallel tracks where we're addressing different dimensions of whether it's the economy, arts and culture, planning and design. So to that point, my quote of the day, even though Peter's was awesome, is change is inevitable, progress is optional. And our organizations are asking all of you to join us as ambassadors to this conversation. This will be archived on the Center for Global Humanities website as a video, so it's all been taped. So if you have friends, colleagues, organizations that you belong to that you found this stimulating and exciting, you'll be able to go and send people a link and they can observe it, even though they weren't able to attend today. And I'd encourage you to do so that we can, maybe 3 to 5 years from now, have 500 people in here. We can strengthen our community's ability to have a conversation about what we want our community to be. And we all know that we want it to be better, and the way to do that is to work together to try to make it happen. So from here, I would like to do one thing, which is to hand out thank you cards to all of you, and you don't have to get up. I'll do that because Saturday morning is a precious time for everyone, and we've been very fortunate to have all these folks here. But I also want to send you back out in the lobby and encourage you to get involved. You know, the organizations that came here today to set up a table have joined all of us in pursuing a vision of a brighter future. So whether it's parks or bikes or education or the environment, you name it, there are people out there who are working hard to try to make a difference in the world. And our goal is to continue to bring us together in larger and larger groups so that we can build the vision that informs the direction that our community goes in. So with that, there are still some donuts out there. I'd encourage everyone to take one home to a loved one or a child, and so I won't eat them all. And enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for coming.